Good evening.
Yeah. Anything.
Sorry?
Every single fucking time. No device, microphone, speakers. There we go.
Hello, hello, hello.
Oh, yeah. Every time.
What have you done?
Skype forgets the settings. Why would it need to?
Well, yeah, it's part of the fun to reset it every time you turn it on.
You'd think, wouldn't you, piece of shit?
Welcome back to We Love the Internet. My name's Harrison.
And I'm Chris.
And we are two nerds who love learning random shit on the internet. And that's what we're going to talk to you about this week. How are you doing, Chris?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. Just packing and planning and usual exciting stuff. What have you been up to?
Ooh, where are you off to?
So we have a brief trip over to South Africa,
Ooh.
which is where my wife is from.
Fantastic.
And hopefully it's not going to be so face-meltingly hot that I'm not going to die. So fingers crossed, my weak English blood doesn't deal so well with the heat.
I'm so with you. What's hot to you?
Well, it's looking like between 25 and 30 degrees, which I think is just going to be about tolerable.
Yeah,
once it
right.
starts getting over 30, then I start panicking.
I'm so with you.
We've been there once when it's been in the 40s, and I just didn't function as a human being for that time.
Yeah, I hate the 40-degree plus. At one time, I was with some friends. We went around Ayers Rock at Uluru in Australia, and it was November, so it was just starting to get warmer. It was like spring, and it was starting to get warmer. And you obviously at that point, I don't think you can anymore, but at that point you could climb up the top of Uluru, but it was closed that particular day because it was windy, I think, which was, I mean, I look at it, I would never have gone up it. Good Lord. There was like a little chain going up the side of it you could hang on to, and that was it. Christ, can you imagine? Anyway, we were walking around it, and I think we must have got around 3/4 way around it, and it took us probably an hour and a half to get around it, maybe 2 hours to get around it. And just, at one point there was this tree like near Uluru, just there's nothing, very scrubland around, very little around, just this one tree like had a few leaves on it and a little bit of shade. I just sat down and said, "You can leave me here, I'm done." just leave me behind because I can't
go on without me.
Yeah, go on without me, save yourselves. I was so hot and it was only November. Oh, it was awful. So yes, I'm with you definitely.
Yeah. That time when it got up to the 40s, even the South African family we were staying with said, "Oh yeah, this is a bit warm," as the pavement is melting under everybody's feet.
Yeah, the tarmac's running.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh man! Oh yeah, I look forward to that. That'd be good.
Yes, it'd be good. Good.
Meltingly warm.
What have you been up to? Anything exciting?
I've been watching The Expanse. Actually, have you seen that?
I have, yes. Good choice. Choice.
I didn't realise how good it was until, I think our mutual friends started talking about it. I was like, I watched like an episode of that years ago. It was rubbish. But I thought, I'll check it out again. And I did. Oh my God, it's good.
Yeah, I had exactly the same thing. I watched an episode and there was just so much new stuff to learn. It kind of didn't really seep in, so I gave up. And then people started talking about how good the new season was, so I thought, okay, fine, I'll start watching it. And then before I know it, I was deep into it, and I just couldn't stop. I had to watch the whole thing through.
Definitely. I don't know, maybe a little while ago, not too long ago, they released season 4, and I've just literally got to season 4 the other day, so I'm on, I think, episode 3 or something.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm loving it. I really, it's fantastic. I love. Go on.
I got to the end of season 3 about a week or so before they released season 4.
Oh, good
so
timing.
I slightly badly timed it because that was a very painful week. I'm like, I've got to know what happens.
Come on, release it.
I could have timed it slightly better, but it was pretty good all in all.
Definitely. I'm probably going to mangle her name, but is it Christian Avasarala?
Yes.
Right. She's amazing. I love her.
She must be drinking whiskey and smoking a cigar constantly to have a voice like that. It's unbelievable.
I reckon she must be.
Just in between scenes, she must just have someone who just runs in and gives her a cigar for her to take a couple of puffs on.
Yeah, her rider is just a box of cigars and a couple of bottles of whiskey.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty good rider too.
Yeah, it's true. Oh, but she's such a good character. Oh, it's just awesome.
Yeah,
I wish our Secretary General was like that. But then again, the UN are a little bit fighty in this universe.
Yes, yeah, maybe a little bit too much for right now, anyway.
It's true. Yeah, so I've been watching that. So I've been very much enjoying it. So I'm going to watch some more of that after we finish this podcast.
Excellent. Yeah, I've been meaning to read the books after I watched all the TV show. Apparently, it started with him basically telling the story of like his local gaming group.
Oh, really?
It was like a role-playing game, yeah.
Oh,
and
books, actually.
Trying to say without spoilers, there's a bit where you start off with like the little crew of people, then all of a sudden one of them is no longer in the TV program, shall we say? And that was because one of their friends just dropped out of the gaming group, so they just had to write him out.
Oh,
so just all of a sudden.
That was a little bit abrupt when it happened, I have to say.
Yeah, that's why.
Oh, okay.
Wow. I won't say any more about it for spoiler reasons, but yeah, you'll know the moment when it happens, and that's why. Because
he seemed like an integral part of the team, and
yeah, exactly.
No longer.
Yeah. Just decided I didn't want to play the game anymore.
Yeah, that's right. Done. Wow. I didn't realise those books. Okay, I'll have to check those out then.
Yeah. I can't remember what they're called now, or who. I think it's someone S. Corey or something like that. I'll put it in the show notes because awesome. It's failing me right now. But yeah, they're on my incredibly long to read list, which I'll definitely get around to at some point, I'm sure.
Cool. Sounds good.
Well, I've got a 12-hour flight coming, so maybe I'll load up my Kindle for that. Shall we get into our topics for this week?
Let's do it.
So my one, I'm going to go first because I'm hosting, so I get to make that decision.
Go for it.
So I found this from a tweet from the excellent QI Twitter account, which is definitely worth a follow. And basically, in 1882, Queen Victoria survived an assassination attempt when her would-be killer was attacked by a schoolboy brandishing an umbrella.
What a patriotic schoolboy.
Absolutely. And obviously, as you could probably guess, a schoolboy from Eton. Because,
of course.
As you say, very patriotic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this was a guy called Roderick Maclean who fired at Queen Victoria as she was getting off a train at Windsor. And after managing to fire one shot, he was set upon by Gordon Wilson, who was an Eton boy, who, as I say, rushed forward and set about him with an umbrella.
Good old Gordon.
Good old Gordon, yes. I'm sure he got a good badge at school for that one when he got back.
He probably did.
I don't imagine his schoolmates would have believed him. You never guess what I did, lads. Yeah, whatever. And actually, as a brief aside, this Gordon chap was actually quite interesting on his own account. His father, Sir Samuel Wilson, was an Australian who apparently introduced salmon into Australian rivers. I didn't know that there were salmon in Australian rivers, so I don't know whether he introduced them and they all died out, but that's what he was famous for. And he would later marry Winston Churchill's aunt, Lady Sarah Spencel Churchill. So the attempted assassin, who was put on trial and found after 5 whole minutes of deliberation. So not entirely sure he had much chance here. But his sentence was not guilty but insane. Well, sorry, his verdict.
Right.
Not guilty, but insane. So it's basically he did it, but he was so insane you can't really blame him for it.
Sure.
And he lived out the rest of his days in Broadmoor Asylum. And as a direct result of this, the Queen, who had, it turns out, been the subject of many such attacks by people over the years who were later considered to be insane, partitioned Parliament to change this verdict in the future to guilty but insane. And this was passed as the charmingly named Trial of Lunatics Act of 1883.
So basically what they're saying is to attack Queen Victoria you had to be insane.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think basically, yeah, they're effectively saying
nobody would otherwise.
No one would otherwise. No. Well, the exact reason for his attempt on the Queen's life was the subject of some disagreement between multiple papers at the time. As I have to confess, was the story about the attack being stopped by a schoolboy. But one version of events said that he had been driven to shoot Victoria after she gave him a curt reply to some poetry that he had sent to her.
Seems like a rational, reasonable response, doesn't it?
Yeah, perfectly fine.
Don't like my poetry, I'm going to try and kill you.
So, apparently, Queen Victoria survived a total of 8 attacks against her, which I had no idea about.
No, 8? That's a lot. Bloody hell.
So there were actually 9, but one of them was by the same guy twice. Across 4 decades. Now, as I go through them, you will start to notice a pattern emerge.
Okay.
So the first was a chap called Edward Oxford, and he seems to have attempted to kill the Queen simply because he wanted to be famous.
Fair enough.
Which fair enough.
Well, fair enough, but sure. Reason.
Well, yeah, it's a good reason as any. Better than not liking your poetry, I
suppose, yeah.
So he approached the royal carriage as it was going through Hyde Park, and despite being only 6 paces away, shot and entirely missed the Queen, like completely missed. He had 2 pistols, but only managed to fire 1 before the public jumped on him.
Oh, wow. Victorians really are a game bunch.
Well, yeah, part of the problem is obviously wherever she was going through London, she's going around in a massive gold carriage, so people see her coming. So there's always crowds of people there.
It's true.
So it's a bit of a brave move. Victoria apparently didn't even see him as she was looking the other way at a horse at the time.
That's going to really, really annoy you, isn't it? You tried to kill her, she didn't see you do it.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And possibly the most British thing ever, they didn't even stop the carriage, they just continued going. Presumably while the guy was receiving a bloody good kicking from the public outside.
To imagine so, yes. Come here, you.
Once the public had finished kicking the crap out of him, he was arrested and found not guilty but insane, and placed in an asylum and eventually deported to Australia. So I'm not sure which was worse for him. And
maybe
the
rest of salmon.
Well, yeah, maybe that's what it was. So the rest of the list is kind of a bit unremarkable, to be honest. One of the people tried twice, and after failing the first time, they decided the way to get him would be to draw him out by having the royal couple just drive around London in the hopes that he would once again attempt to take a shot at them.
Wow, that's risky.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was ever fully explained to the Queen, but that's not something I would agree to. No. But it worked. The guy jumped out, and this time was only 5 paces away, but also entirely missed. So apparently guns weren't very accurate in those days.
No.
And once again, a bunch of people jumped on him, and the police grabbed him. And another guy jumped out at the Queen, effectively in the same way, just while she was driving through London, but jumped out, pointed his pistol, and then didn't get a shot off because he'd loaded his gun mostly with tobacco instead of gunpowder.
I have started to see the reason they convict them as insane, to be honest with you.
Exactly, yeah. You're starting to see the pattern emerging here,
yes,
right?
I am.
So the only person who actually managed to hurt the Queen during their attempt was someone who was described as a well-known local lunatic in London, who it seems was just walking through London and chanced upon the Queen, who was once again in her carriage, and simply charged forward and bopped her on the noggin with his walking stick.
Did he get the crap kicked out of him as well?
Well, yes. As previously in the other situations, there was a crowd of people, and they understandably took umbrage to his action and grabbed the guy, and were in the process of giving him the by now standard bloody good kicking, when Victoria stood up and said, "I am not hurt," despite having a lump on her head and a black eye.
Wow.
So I don't know how much of a kicking he got, but apparently the Queen tried to at least stop that bit.
Sure.
And he was also sent to Australia. So there's the
one-way ticket.
The theme to how to get to Australia apparently is to take a shot at the Queen. So there we go. So this then took me on a little bit of a Wikipedia rabbit hole, as these things tend to. And I started looking at other unsuccessful assassination attempts. So obviously when you talk about assassinations, the most, well, for me anyway, the thing that came to mind first of all was the various attempts that had been made on the American presidents over the years.
Sure.
How many attempts do you think there have been on either sitting presidents, presidents-elect, or retired presidents?
Ooh, well, Lincoln was killed, and so was JFK, so that's 2 at least.
Yeah,
Reagan was shot at and injured, so that's 3.
Yep.
I don't know, let's add another. Oh, they've got all access to guns over there. If Victoria got shot at 8 times, I mean, Americans are going to up that game, aren't they?
I'll tell you now that every single one of these involves a firearm as the weapon of choice, which, go figure. It's American.
Let's say, I don't know, 18 times.
So there have been 30 attempts altogether.
Wow.
Yes. 4 have been successful, and 2 succeeded in injuring the president. And the 2 that included injuring the president are quite interesting. So the first is Theodore Roosevelt, who was shot just before he was due to make a speech. But the bullet hit his 50-page script that was in his pocket.
50-page script? You're going to bore them all to death?
50-page speech. Can you imagine how exciting that was going to be?
Wow, that's a lot of script.
And it, quote, barely lodged itself in his chest.
Billy?
Barely. But despite this, he didn't seek medical attention, didn't go to hospital, and just carried on giving his speech. Which, considering it was 50 pages, I imagine several people in the audience were quite disappointed that they didn't stop him.
You're damn right.
He did the entire speech. The only modification he made was to change the beginning, and he started his speech by saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose."
Nice.
Yeah, quite a guy.
I wonder if he got a separate copy of the speech from somewhere else, because the whole blown in his copy.
He just had to work his way around the bullet hole that was going straight through the screen.
Yeah, try and work out the words were.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, Reagan also was the victim of an attempted assassination.
Yeah.
The guy who shot him did so because he was obsessed with Jodie Foster and wanted to get her attention and become famous. So he decided the way to do that was to kill the president. So
I think he should have been there. He should have got Victoria's kind of punishment. I think they were kicking by the locals, and then declared insane.
Well, he was basically and he's currently in jail, I believe, as of this recording.
Yeah.
In a bit of an asylum. And despite getting so close to the president that he was able to discharge all 6 shots of his revolver.
Wow.
He managed to miss with every single one of the bullets, and it was only because of a ricochet that Reagan was hurt. So I don't know how. You can't fire a revolver 6 times that quickly. He must have been there for a while before anybody did something about it. And the ricochet that hit Reagan was actually quite bad. It nicked his lung and caused lots of internal bleeding. So it could actually have killed him if the medics hadn't been quick to respond. But it was basically pure bad luck.
Sure.
That he got hit by a ricochet. Somebody attempted to shoot Andrew Jackson, pulling not 1 but 2 guns on him, but both misfired. So Jackson walked up and gave him a good thrashing with his cane, and had to be pulled off when the police arrived.
Was it no Secret Service back then?
No, just the president and his cane.
Yeah, just fight him off himself. Yeah. Imagine Trump doing that.
So somehow I can't
no,
picture that somehow.
Can I?
So you mentioned Lincoln assassination. That's probably one of the most famous.
Yeah.
Now, what I didn't know was that the killing of Lincoln was only one part of a plot, which also included attempts on his vice president and secretary of state all on the same day.
Oh.
So only the shooting of the president in the theatre went to plan. The guy who was dispatched to kill the Secretary of State had planned to slip into his house and kill him while pretending to give him some medicine, as the Secretary of State, William Seward, was in bed recovering from a carriage accident. So the plan went well. He managed to get into the house, but then he was walking up the stairs when he bumped into Seward's son, who was coming downstairs, and told him that the secretary was sleeping. And when the guy told him what he was there to give him his medicine, he said, "No, it's okay, I'll take the medicine up myself." So in that situation, what would you do presented with this circumstance?
As in being the would-be assassin?
Yes, yeah.
Well, hopefully I'd have a bottle of something with me just in case I got asked to provide evidence that I was going to give this medicine. But if I didn't, I don't know, run? Don't split? I'm not really sure.
History doesn't seem to record whether or not he actually did bring some fake medicine with him. But what he did bring was a gun and a knife.
Oh.
So the guy panicked.
Straight to this.
He pulled a revolver out and attempted to shoot the son, but suffered from a misfire. As seems to be the case in these days.
Yep.
So the attacker, Lewis Powell, did at least have a bit of a get-up-and-go attitude. So he pistol-whipped the son, striking him several times in the head.
Ooh.
He then stormed into the secretary's bedroom, stabbed him multiple times in the face and the neck, and then fled the house. Whilst he was attempting to flee the house, he bumped into the guy's other son, who'd heard the commotion and come to investigate. He stabbed him. And then he also bumped into a soldier who was supposedly standing guard, stabbed him. He stabbed a nurse, and then there was a messenger at the front door who just happened to be delivering a message at the wrong time, and he also got stabbed.
Jesus
so he left a trail of carnage, shall we say.
Yes.
Everybody survived.
Well, that's good.
Every single one of the people he attacked survived, seemed to be absolutely fine, and Powell was arrested the next day and hanged. So,
too right, I think, in that case.
I think that's probably understandable. It's the messenger I really feel sorry for.
Well, the nurse as well. Well, she just came out of the corridor.
Well, yeah, just happened to be in the area. There's a deranged assassin with a gun and a knife is going mad in the area.
Thank God he didn't have. Well, obviously they had a weapon of the type, but fortunately it was just one shot and it misfired. God,
yeah.
Crazy.
So another unsuccessful assassination attempt was one that was made on the life of Louis XV, and again wasn't really a well planned out attack, to be honest. So a guy approached him on a very, very cold night, went straight past his guards somehow, and stabbed him with a penknife. Like a little flip blade.
Right.
However, the king was wearing a very thick coat because it was winter, and the blade basically just like nicked him.
Wow, that's a thick coat.
Yeah. The king was a little dramatic, however, and thinking that he was basically... I know, just to try and imagine a dramatic French king, it's very difficult.
It's impossible.
So thinking that he was dying, he immediately apologised to his wife for having had many, many, many affairs during his life. Unfortunately for him, he very quickly recovered. So must have been slightly awkward for the family meals for the rest of their life. And the guy who attempted to assassinate him was executed 2 months later. So apparently they don't fuck around in France.
No.
Possibly one of the most famous people who was attempted to be assassinated many, many times has to be Castro, Fidel Castro. It's estimated, it's hard to know, that there were more than 600 plots or plans against him from various rival political groups and, of course, the CIA.
Yes, good old CIA.
Yes, good old CIA. Most of these were themed around his various passions, apparently chief amongst which was scuba diving. Oh. So if you wanted to kill someone who was into scuba diving, how would you go about it?
Put something in his tank, maybe. There's not oxygen. Or send somebody with him that can cut his tubes and to keep him underwater, drown him. I don't know.
Yeah, that was basically my thought as well. But they got a little bit more creative, shall we say? One plan involved swapping his wetsuit with one that was infected with a lethal fungus inside.
Fungus?
A fungus that would get into his skin and kill him, apparently.
That's quite complicated.
Well, not as complicated as the next one. So there was a plan to fill mollusk shells with lots and lots of explosives, place them in areas they knew he regularly dived. But of course, anyone could be diving down there.
Yeah.
And just to make sure that he went to the right shells, they painted them in bright colours to try and attract his attention.
I'm shocked it didn't work.
No, incredibly not. And then there's also the famous cases of like exploding cigars, exploding pens, several attempts to poison his coffee and his drinks and all that kind of thing, including at one point attempting to hire a couple of Chicago gangsters. And all of these failed, and he managed to retire in his 80s. So yes. that's good.
Do you think the CIA were watching too many Bond movies?
I think they may have done. Yes, their explosives department clearly got some ideas above their station.
Yeah, exactly. Clearly looking at Q thinking we could do this.
Now, talking of incredible assassination devices, we have to mention the story of... So whenever you hear me tell a story involving a person with a very complicated name, you've got to know that it's a good story, because I'm going to butcher this name, but I think it's worth doing for the hilarity of this story.
Go for it.
So this is a guy called Giuseppe Marco Fieschi,
Ooh.
who I'm almost definitely not saying his name correctly, but
sounds Italian.
When you hear what he did, you'll see why I don't care that I'm messing up his name. So he really hated King Louis Philippe.
Okay.
And he knew that if he attempted to shoot him, he'd only get one shot. So in that situation, how would you try and deal with like only having one shot to make sure you're going to make that one shot count?
Well, it depends on the period of history, I suppose. But if it's like I've got one shot, it's probably get close, or because the distance is going to be, you can't really snipe him. It's too far. And
no, we're talking. We're talking 1800s. So
right. Get close.
The time of misfiring guns and inaccuracy and all the rest.
Total inaccuracy. Get close.
You'd go up close and personal.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so Giuseppe came up with he walked down a different path, shall we say. He came up with the incredible idea of strapping 25 rifle barrels together. And
25?
Setting them up, 25, and strapping them up so that they would all be fired at once. He loaded each barrel with 6 to 8 balls, 13 or 14 slugs, severe amounts of wadding, and about 10 centimeters of gunpowder. That's per barrel. He referred to this contraption as his infernal machine.
This is going to go well for him.
No. Well, you're seeing ahead a little bit, but it does not go well for him. So he knew that the king would often be seen in the streets of Paris.
Mm-hmm.
So he got a room in one building overlooking the Boulevard du Temple, and waited for the king to be crossing the street, which he knew he was going to happen.
Sure.
And when he saw the king crossing the street, he let rip with his weapon, which was 3 foot long and 4 foot wide. Now, it's not known exactly, but it's estimated that his weapon discharged over 400 projectiles, even though 4 of the barrels misfired. Now, he wasn't just shooting at the king. The king was crossing the road with his family and with a whole bunch of bystanders all around.
Sure.
Now, sadly, he killed 18 people and injured another 22, including multiple people who had to have limbs amputated. The king suffered a graze to his forehead. Now, unfortunately for Giuseppe, 4 of the barrels exploded.
That's why I thought it was going to happen to the whole thing, you see.
Yes.
You were talking about how much you put in them.
Only 4 somehow of the 25 exploded, but he did suffer severe injuries to his face, his head, and his hand. He was basically found when the authorities were quite easily identified the window that this cannon was fired from. They entered the building and they just followed this blood trail from the room where his infernal machine was to find him just like crawling, trying to make his escape out of the building. Now, he was in a bit of a bad way, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And the king actually paid for his medical treatment.
Wow.
While he was in jail, and Giuseppe thought this fantastic. The king clearly wants to, make a deal with me here and find out about my other conspirators.
Sure.
But it turns out the king did that so that he could be there to watch when the guy was guillotined. As previously mentioned, the French don't fuck about.
No, indeed. They do not. How many people did he kill with that gun?
He killed 18 people and seriously injured 22 more. And I suppose effectively killed himself as well. So,
a little bit later on. That's horrendous. See, I thought you were going to say just blew up and killed him, but that's terrible.
No. If going back to the French don't fuck around, the French kept the infernal machine and put it in a museum for people to go along and look at.
Wow. Okay. In Paris
yes.
somewhere.
I believe so, yes. I will link to the Wikipedia articles of all of those stories, as well as some other web pages that I got some of that information from. So there we go, some humorous failed assassination attempts from history.
Yeah, okay, brilliant, thank you. I'm not laughing at people dying, that's terrible, but machine sounds terrible.
The infernal machine, I mean, obviously it's incredibly horrific that he killed 18 people and injured 22, but my God, you've got to say he kind of did it with style.
Yeah, he went hard.
Yeah, he really did. He really did, and I suppose you could probably classify him as someone who was killed by his own invention, because it probably was.
Yes.
Which is another interesting list that I might do one day.
Oh yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah. So there we go. Failed assassinations.
Thank you very much. I haven't think quite as explosive as that.
Not as explosive as 25 rifle barrel. That's disappointing.
No, nothing quite that bad. Nothing quite that explosive, though. I've got the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
Oh.
And what that's about. So
what is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch?
A bit like last time, last episode, I'm going to talk about how big the Pacific Ocean is first, before I actually get into what the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is, because I think we've got to understand how huge, what we're dealing with here at the moment.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Now, obviously, all the people listening are great at geography, and I know exactly where the Pacific Ocean is. But just in case there's a few people who don't, where the hell is the Pacific Ocean? Because
the Pacific Ocean sits between the United States West Coast and Japan, Australia, sort of eastern China. That's sort of so that's huge body of water, basically.
Gotcha.
And in fact, it is the largest mass of water on the planet. It's the ocean basin is larger than the landmass of all the continents combined. So it's absolutely epically huge.
Yeah, that's pretty big. That's pretty big.
Pretty huge. It contains almost twice as much water as the second largest body of water in the world, the Atlantic Ocean, which is obviously between the east coast of the United States and Europe. And the Pacific Ocean is the largest and deepest ocean basin on Earth, and it covers more than 155 million square kilometres. Can I say that properly? 155 million square kilometres. Well, that's 60 million square miles. So, I mean, yeah, the distances we're talking about are massive.
That's pretty big.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's pretty big.
And it averages a depth of 4,000 metres, which is about 13,000 feet. So that's actually 4 kilometres or 2.4 miles deep. So it's huge. Yeah, I think the size of the ocean we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And as I said, it's the also the world's deepest body of water. So it's the largest and deepest. So I mean, the absolute. So you just it's incredible. It takes you 11.5 hours to fly from Tokyo to San Francisco. It's that big. I mean, yeah, we're talking massive distances here.
Yeah, that's a fair old chunk of space.
Yes, absolutely. Which is where the Pacific Garbage Patch is hiding. And to just give you one more thing, there's the deepest place on Earth that we know about is also in the Pacific Ocean, and it's called Challenger Deep, and it's more than 11,000 meters deep. Or 30,000 feet, yeah. So it's if you think 2.5 miles is deep, 11,000 meters is even, it's epic.
Just the very thought of picturing that as someone who has a slight phobia of water just terrifies me.
Yes.
The possibility that you could go that far in the water just sends a shiver down my spine.
Mm-hmm. You'll have to have a pretty goddamn good. I don't think everybody's ever got to the bottom of. I don't know if they've got down to the bottom of Challenger Deep, but yes, it's pretty pressurized submarine to do that. Anyway, the Pacific Ocean was discovered and named, I mean, obviously by a European, because that's how we do things. Yep. And his name was Ferdinand Magellan, a bit like your Giuseppe. My guy was from Portugal, and he discovered and named the Pacific Ocean in 1520. And obviously Ferdinand was a Portuguese navigator, and he was actually employed by Spain to find the western route to the Spice Islands via South America.
Okay.
So I don't know what the Spice Islands what the Spice Islands are, or what he was looking for specifically. I guess somewhere that they could ship lots of spice back to Europe, back to Spain, but it's never really spoken about. But yeah, he was looking for the Spice Islands. His little fleet braved perilous seas and navigated to what is now known as the Straits of Magellan, obviously named after him. Mm-hmm. And when he exited the Straits of Magellan, he found a body of water, which is obviously now the Pacific Ocean, and due to the calmness of the ocean on that day that he found it, he called it Pacific, which in Portuguese. Well, see, I know I've looked on Google Translate, and I've typed in Pacific in Portuguese and come out in English, and it just says Pacific. But apparently, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is the US government administration, that it does mean Pacific means peaceful. So maybe back in 1520 it did mean peaceful.
Yeah. I hope you're not saying that Google Translate isn't 100% accurate.
No, I would never say such a thing. Because of course it is. Like
Wikipedia.
Always true.
It allows anybody to be a language expert.
Completely. And so can you imagine what they would call it if it had been raging with massive storm raging that day that he found it? But anyway, he called it the Pacific Ocean. And so when Magellan and his crew entered the Pacific Ocean after their really long journey of getting there, they thought the Spice Islands were nearby. They thought they'd be able to get to them, because obviously found the shortcut would be really quick and easy now. But little did they know, their destination remained thousands of miles away. And again, I don't really know what the Spice Islands were. It's not really mentioned, but he was looking. Now onto the Great Pacific Garbage Patch itself. It's also known as the Pacific Trash Vortex, and it spans the ocean from the coast of Japan all the way to the west coast of the United States. So bearing in mind how large I said the ocean was, I mean that's a lot of garbage. And our oceanographers, that's easy for me to say, and ecologists spent a long time speculating about the existence of such a giant patch of rubbish, but they didn't know it actually existed until 1997. There was a fella called Charles Moore, and he's a racing yacht captain, and he finished a race, and he was taking a shortcut home from Hawaii to California after completing a yacht race, and he found he basically sailed through it. He sailed through the Gulf of Ocean, and that's how it was discovered, and that it was out there. So yeah, pretty disgusting thing to sail through, I'd imagine. Yeah. You're not expecting it, and you find it suddenly.
That's an unfortunate thing to discover.
Yeah, not so nice, I wouldn't imagine.
No.
And so there's sort of two massive swells. There's the Western Garbage Patch, which is located in Japan, and surprisingly the Eastern Garbage Patch, which swells around United States, near the states of Hawaii and California, obviously offshore there. And in total, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, they believe, is 1.6 million square kilometres. Yeah, which is actually huge. So to put that in some context, that's actually twice the size of Texas. Or 3 times the size of France. So we're talking about some pretty goddamn massive sizes here. But I guess, considering the size of the Pacific Ocean, it sort of gets lost. Or can potentially be lost inside that space, really.
Yeah.
And the Western and Eastern patches are linked together by the North Pacific Subtropical Convergence Zone. Say that with my teeth in. which is located a few hundred miles north of Hawaii.
That's a catchy title.
It really is. You can tell scientists name these things, can't you? Oh, it gets better. There's a word I'm going to say in a minute. I just don't know how to say it, so we'll get on with it. And the convergence zone is where the warm water from the South Pacific meets the cooler water from the Arctic. So obviously it swirls around. And it acts as a highway that moves the debris from one patch to another. So they're sort of connected by this convergence zone, essentially.
Sure.
And the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is bounded by the North Pacific Subtropical Gyre. Now, it's Gyre, so I hope I'm saying it right. And the gyre is defined as a large system of swirling ocean currents. So all this stuff is basically swirling around in between, in the middle of the Pacific. And as I say, twice the size of Texas, so it's absolutely massive.
Yeah.
The North Pacific Subtropical Gyre, say that easily, is actually formed of 4 currents rotating clockwise around the area of around 20 million square kilometres, which is about 7.7 million square miles. So yeah, it's an absolutely massive area. And that's the California Current, the North Equatorial Current, the Kuroshio. I've said this earlier to myself and I got it right. I thought, anyway, I'm not now. Anyway, that current and the North Pacific Current. So there's 4 of them, which sort of move all of this garbage around. And the area at the centre of the gyre tends to be very calm and stable, which means all the plastics and all the other debris is sort of drawn into the middle and trapped there. Which is pretty bad, really.
Yeah.
You'd imagine that when it's described as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, there's sort of an island of rubbish out there, like in the middle, but it isn't actually the case. It's actually made up of millions of tons, I'd imagine. I don't know. Nobody's ever weighed it. Microplastics.
Yeah.
So these are the plastics sort of broken down by the sun over time, sun and the water, the waves and the water, and so they're tinier and tinier and turn into microplastics, and they're sort of like it's about a millimetre in size. They're tiny basically. So what you might imagine is this huge, like, full of plastic bottles and I don't know, all sorts of other stuff, shoes and whatever else. But it's not. It's actually, majority of it is this sort of cloudy soup of microplastics. Yeah, quite. It just gets better and better, doesn't it? We should start with mine, maybe. I don't know.
I hope no one's listening to this episode whilst enjoying their lunch.
Yeah, hopefully not.
They might be enjoying it a little less all of a sudden.
No, indeed. Just don't throw garbage into the water, I suppose. But it's all broken down, and this process is known as photodegradation. It turns, obviously, the larger plastics into microplastics over time. There is, of course, other plastics, like I mentioned, so bottles and shoes and God knows whatever else. But actually, it's fishing nets that to make up the sort of the largest part of all of this. Obviously, they get cut loose for whatever reason from fishing boats, and they're actually the worst pollutant of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And all this debris, a lot of it floats on the top. The yacht captain saw when he was sailing through it, but there's actually sort of it descends sort of a few centimetres to a few metres below the waterline as well. So obviously, it's very hard to work out exactly how much is out there. It's quite incredible. What is making up this Great Pacific Garbage Patch?
Yeah,
and because of the size of it, and obviously it's out in the middle of nowhere, and it's potentially a few meters deep. Oceanographers don't actually know how big it is, really.
Good Lord, can't imagine there's many volunteers to go in and measure it.
No, exactly, not really, no. In fact, nobody really takes any real sort of ownership of it because it's in the middle of a bunch of countries in the middle of the ocean. Yeah. Nobody's out of sight, out of mind. Yeah. Nobody actually wants to deal with it. The oceanographers and ecologists recently discovered that about 70% of the marine debris actually sinks to the bottom of the ocean. So, yeah, if you've got like 30% is making up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, but obviously all this microplastics and all the disgusting other stuff, actually 70% drops to the ocean floor. So you can imagine how much is down there. It must be just one huge, massive rubbish tip. It must be awful what we're doing down there. It's because obviously most of it's heavy, so it sinks.
Yeah. So about 30% of it's all that you could see.
Yeah, well, yes, indeed, and even then it's cloudy because it's actually microplastics. So, it's pretty horrendous, really. I mean, when I first heard about it, I thought it was like plastic bottles, shoes, anything else that's plastic that would float.
Yeah.
But it's not. It really isn't. And that stuff the stuff that will sink goes to the bottom, you get completely out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
But yes, as I mentioned just now, the majority of the sort of floating garbage patches, 705,000 tonnes in fact, is actually fishing nets, which is obviously cut off for whatever reason from the fishing boats. Either they've got a hole cut in them, been cutting them somehow, or they're just not useful to them anymore. I mean, it's terrible that they don't. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, nobody's out there with you. Nobody will see. It's terrible they won't take them home. But yeah, so but of course there are more unusual items. Community monitors, Lego, a lot of stuff can be dropped from shipping containers.
Okay.
Yeah, but about 54% of it comes from land-based activities, from North America and Asia. So I guess it falls into rivers, and then obviously is sent out to sea that way, ends up in the garbage patch. And then the 20% comes off sort of boats, ships, oil rigs, cargo ships. If there's wild weather and like a cargo container or whatever gets dumped overboard, or whatever else. Yeah.
So it's not so much people deliberately emptying stuff out there, kind of like going into the middle of the ocean and tipping over the edge. It's more just stuff ending up in the water and making its way there.
Pretty much, yeah, absolutely. There's actually, I'll talk about an organisation in a minute trying to sort of clean this up, but they're actually trying to invent sort of river catching, way to catch the rubbish before it even gets into the oceans or into the Pacific Ocean. So yes, exactly. So obviously all of this rubbish is all this garbage is terrible for the wildlife that inhabits the Pacific Ocean. For example, there's the loggerhead sea turtle that often mistakes plastic bags for jellies, which is their favourite food. Yeah, so obviously it's no good for them. They die pretty quickly after ingesting rubbish plastic bags. And then the albatrosses think that plastic resin pellets are actually fish eggs, and they feed them to their chicks, which obviously then either die of starvation or ruptured organs. I mean, it's all round, it's horrendous. Obviously killing off the wildlife, as well as polluting the environment. So none of this is good. Well, none of this at the moment is good. It gets worse. Which I'm glad you're here. I'm sure you're glad to hear. The microplastics, the sort of cloudy thing I mentioned just now that makes the surface very cloudy, they actually end up blocking sunlight getting through to the plankton and the algae just below the sea, surface of the sea. And obviously this is bad news for the algae and the plankton because they are common, again another word I'm going to struggle with, common autotrophs.
Right.
They're producers of them. They're basically essentially the producers of all marine food. Essentially, they're bottom of the food chain. Yeah. And plankton and algae produce their own nutrients from the carbon and sunlight, so they're vital to the health of the entire food chain. So if they die out, if they can't get their food, then it affects all the way up the food chain to us in the end, to humans. All round, not very good. But as I say, because it's sort of out of sight, out of mind, nobody up until a few years ago really cared about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
Yeah, I was going to say, I bet no one's particularly tripping over themselves to go out and deal with it, are they?
No, indeed. And in fact, Charles Moore, who I mentioned a moment ago, who's the yacht captain, he's the one who he found the Great Pacific Garbage Patch by sailing through it. He said that he believed that trying to clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch would bankrupt any country that tried it. So another reason for nobody to bother, really. Yeah. And obviously it's in the middle of nowhere, so it's not like anybody has responsibility. It's not like it's an inland sea or it's all this rubbish is washing up on certainly United States, California beaches or whatever. This is out in the middle of the absolute middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Enter
the Ocean Cleanup Organisation. Now these guys are a non-profit organisation that are developing technologies to rid the world's ocean of plastics, specifically the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And they're in the process of creating and testing a passive ocean cleanup technology. So what essentially this thing will do is move around with the currents and collect the rubbish that is just on the surface and a metre or so below the surface. So not the stuff that's sunk to the bottom of the ocean, but all the stuff that's sort of floating around out there. And the organisation estimates that they'll be able to remove 50% of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch every 5 years, and their ultimate goal is to remove 90% by 2040. So they obviously have a plan, and they've been testing this cleanup technology to do that, which is excellent. I mean, it's really fantastic. I mean, we may cause these problems, but yeah, at least people are stepping up to actually try and sort this problem out. And so the system they've actually created, it basically consists of a long floater that sits on the surface of the water and a skirt that hangs beneath it. And the floater provides buoyancy to the entire system, while the skirt prevents any debris from escaping from underneath. So it basically can't go anywhere, but it doesn't stop fish or other turtles or whoever, whatever else, whatever the wildlife wants to escape. It's not like a net; they can essentially swim under it and get away. So it traps just the plastic. Yeah, no, it is, absolutely. And then obviously as it's floating around, it pushes all of this rubbish into its retention system, or the cod end. For whatever reason it's called the cod end. Maybe it's a nautical term, I'm not really sure. And then there's a cork line above the skirt that prevents it from overtopping and keeps the skirt afloat, so it keeps it all sort of floating properly, so it can continue to catch the rubbish underneath the very top of the top of the sea. And the Ocean Cleanup have had some success in collecting these plastics and using this self-contained system. They call the system 001/B. So you can tell they're a bunch of nerds. They're not calling it something really marketable. This is System 001/B. And they've managed to collect large plastics, including the fishing nets, the ones that 705,000 tons that make up this Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and also smaller plastics and the microplastics down to a millimetre thick. So they've managed to do obviously excellent work in this testing. And what happens is this self-contained system basically floats with the currents and collects this rubbish, and then every so often tug will come along and obviously go and connect up to the retention system and I would imagine probably load it all on board. I don't know if they've quite figured out how to do this, but load it all on board and take it back to shore. And what they plan to do is recycle these plastics that they collect into other things. Obviously they're trying to work out what they can do right now.
What the hell do you do with that once you bring it back?
Indeed. But yes, that's the plan, is to recycle into useful goods again. That's really amazing. So right now they've done some testing with System 001/B, and they've obviously figured out, they've obviously worked out things that aren't working, things that are working, and overall their idea they believe will actually work. And so the organisation has now turned to designing System 002. Because of course it's called System 002, which will be the actual sort of full-scale cleanup system, and they'll be able to gather a lot more, leave it out in the ocean for many months. And obviously there's going to be GPS trackers attached to these things, so shipping can work out what to avoid. They want to crash into these systems, obviously in the dark, what have you. So, and obviously when the organisation comes to collect all the rubbish that the system's collected, then they'll be able to know obviously exactly where it is. So that's obviously going to happen as well.
That sounds basically like my Roomba, which we just leave to automatically go around the house, and every now and again you just have to go and empty its little box at the back there.
Yes, it does.
Like basically exactly the same system.
Absolutely, pretty much. Yeah. An ocean version of Roomba.
Yeah. But I could have figured that out.
Yeah, totally. I was thinking about it last week, so I don't know. I didn't do it myself. But
I could have come up with a better name than, what was it, 001B?
Yeah, exactly, System 001/B. Yeah, they need a marketing person on their team, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, if they do have a marketing person, they're not earning their keep.
No, really not. And so basically, obviously they're working on this right now, and they've had successes, and hopefully by 2040 they will have their 90% reduction. And in association to having these river collectors, the less waste will end up in the ocean, and so therefore we will be dealing with this problem, and obviously we'll clear it down, and it will no longer be a problem in the future. It's 2020 right now, so maybe in 20 years' time that'll be amazing. But even if and when they do that, that doesn't stop the problem of the vast quantity of rubbish that's on the bottom of the ocean floor now. where they all sort of drop down.
To deal with that?
No, well, indeed, that'll be humanity's next thing to deal with. If we can deal with the ocean on the surface of the ocean, then I think we obviously have to go and look at that. But you know, depending on, as you mentioned, how deep it is, right at the beginning of this conversation, and you got the Challenger Deep, which is 11,000 meters deep, but on average it's 4,000 meters deep. So it's absolutely epic. So that's going to be another problem at some point in the future. I think we're going to have to, as a human race, deal with.
Yeah, because presumably even if they're obviously whilst they're cleaning, more stuff is going to be coming in.
Yes.
And even if they are dealing with that stuff that's coming in, some of it's going to be sinking. So they're not dealing with everything that's coming in.
Indeed.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So yes, at some point we're going to have to, I don't know, get in subs, maybe an automatic Roomba for the ocean floor, perhaps. I'm not really quite sure how they're going to do it, but they do need to do. Somebody needs to do it.
Yeah, I'm not sure my Roomba idea extends to going underneath the water. I don't know if there's a submarine Roomba. Maybe that's what they did. I don't know. I'm more the ideas man. Than make it happen.
You mean it's not waterproof? I'm quite disappointed now.
No, unfortunately, my particular model isn't. I don't think it's suitable for the task, if I'm honest.
Hopefully they can work it out in the future, though. Eh?
Yeah. I'm sure they can figure something out. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And if you want to know more about the ocean cleanup, basically they've got a website, because of course they have, and it's theoceancleanup.com.
Excellent,
and we'll link that too as well.
Well, if you pardon the phrase, that topic was a load of rubbish.
Boom, boom.
Thank you very much.
Here a week, try the fish.
Well, yeah, probably. It's incredible those kind of problems on those kind of scales, like how you even begin trying to think how to deal with them. It
is mind-boggling, isn't it? I mean, when you consider how large, I mean, it's twice the size of Texas. That's the size of the Pacific Ocean. It's just it's bonkers. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And obviously we cause these problems. Human beings live the way we live, and we cause these issues. We have to clean up after ourselves. So yeah, it's very good that they're doing that.
Yeah, for sure. At least someone's working on it.
Absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. Well, if you want to talk to us about anything that we've discussed, there's a multitude of ways you can get in touch with us. You can find us on Twitter. You can email the show. If you go to our website, welivetheinternet.co.uk, you'll find lots of buttons to poke and comments to leave and so forth. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any knowledge of the topics we've spoken about, or if you go on your own Wikipedia dive based on what we've been saying, let us know. If you work for the company that names their products 0001/B, maybe have a chat to us about why you do that.
We'd love to know.
We'd love to know. And if you do indeed have a PR person, we'd definitely love to know that. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.